Welcome back to Comic Book History, Episode 12. This one we're talking about the series JLA, a 125-issue comic book that lasted from 1997 to 2006. The replacement for the Justice League America series, which had gotten a bit, probably was losing sales, and DC probably need to relaunch Justice League, but DC is like, okay, even though this book is not selling really well, but we really want to keep the Justice League around, let's just cancel this book and replace it with just three simple letters, JLA. And they handed off to Grant Morrison, who did the first 41 issues of the series. I should also point this out that Tony Bedard was the editor of those issues, and that's where he met Grant Morrison. He told me this when I met him at MegaCon Tampa last year. And after he left, Mark Waid took over, and he did it for a good period of time. If anyone's familiar with the famous storyline Tower of Babel, the awesome Mark Waid actually wrote that storyline. Now, this was the second time he had written Justice League, because he actually took over as the writer of the book after Dan Jurgens left, where he took over for a very brief period of time, then left, of course, handed off to Joe Jones, who was actually not bad of a writer. It's just that his Justice League American run was just, well, it got, like, once it got past issue 100, it's like the book got became boring and terrible storytelling and terrible artwork. Yeah. I don't blame Joe Jones for this. It's just that basically at that point in time, they probably needed it. But back to JLA. Also, Kurt Busiek also had a pretty lengthy run in the book. Also, Jeff Johns wrote Justice League for the first time, though he wrote the last few issues of the series. There's two other set of people who actually wrote the series, and that was Chris Claremont and John Byrne. The two guys, the two people who basically started the X-Men Renaissance from the late 1970s. Yeah, basically, even though John Byrne wasn't the original artist on that run, he was one of the most prolific artists in that run. He was even the co-writer of the Kenny X-Men book. Yep. Which during their very brief run, they brought back they basically sort of did a reboot of the Doom Patrol, basically retconning all previous history out of existence. Now, here's the thing about this. I didn't like the retcon because I had previously read the other stuff, and I really enjoyed Doom Patrol. I was reading at the time, read it online. But this layer spun off into a very short-lived 18-issue comic book, which was actually really good. I do appreciate it. Was actually a really dang good comic book. And the start of the series, Martian Manhunter and Batman were in the first handful of issues, though, basically. And also the series was very heavily serialized over the course of 18 issues. And the team basically based their operations out of a prison. Yeah. But this was, of course, just a few short years before the title's end. But, also, the title also not only brought back Doom Patrol, but also brought back Aquaman, which had been canceled at this point 2 years prior to this. Yeah, the title had been gone for at least about a couple years, so DC said, okay, let's bring it back. But they brought in the guy who would be the first writer of Aquaman Volume 6. Kurt Busiek later did become the writer for like a year on the comic, when the comic became Aquaman Star of Atlantis. Of course, people know Kurt Busiek as the guy who, one of the people who behind the awesome Astro City series, and I believe he's also one of the, if I remember correctly, I think he's also one of the I think he's one of the people who was behind during the first 6 years of. He's kind of in the way the creator of the Thunderbolts. So that's why people are familiar with him, and of course people are also familiar with him thanks to his run on Avengers. Yeah, which makes him one of the handful of writers over the course of the period of the last 50 years to write both Justice League and Avengers. Kurt Busiek basically also runs on both books, and both runs have been collected. Kurt Busiek's run on Justice League has been collected twice. His run on Avengers collected once in the Avengers Assemble trades. And no, they have nothing to do with the Avengers Assemble series, though I brought Michael Bendis in 2012. Completely unrelated. The series had various different stories with it. But when Grant Morrison started it, he wanted to do it back the basics approach by simply have the group start out with, well, the original 7, which was Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Aquaman and Martian Manhunter. Not Cyborg, Martian Manhunter. Yeah, people more familiar with Cyborg being found in Justice League in the past 6 years than Martian Manhunter. Though that incarnation, he did join it. But I'll get to that one in a later episode. But these original 7 came back now. But there's some unique differences between. There's one unique difference between the original 7 and the one from the one that formed in JLA #1. It's not Barry Allen and Hal Jordan at this point in time. At this point in time, it's Kyle Rayner and Wally West, who are part of the JLA at this point. But technically, it's the founding members of the Justice League. But later on, they did have Green Arrow, both Oliver Queen and Connor Hawke were both part of the Justice League. They even Connor Hawke even had brief tension with the Justice League, even during a period of time when his comic book was being coming out. Of course, that was the point in time when it was done by Chuck Dixon. Excuse me. But it had various different stories. Heck, even Nightwing. This was also during the period of time when Nightwing briefly joined the team, as well. They also had there was also the very awesome miniseries JLA/Titans Imperative, which spun off into a 50-issue comic book, The Titans, which I might get to in a later episode, but just got pointed out. They also had a crossover with Wildcats, which is actually a pretty good miniseries, though the actual crossover between DC and Wildstorm I've heard is really terrible. I've never read it, but it's really bad. But this is the most well-known incarnation of the past 20 years. This is the most well-known incarnation, and this incarnation also got people to jump onto the book. Now, I heard from one person that during the period of 2000 to 2001, the artwork for the series turned really, really bad, and he refused to pick up trades, basically to collect issues in this particular era. I've read these issues, and I'm like, what the heck is he talking about? The artwork is not terrible. I mean, yeah, it's his opinion, and he can stick to it, but I read these issues, and the artwork was actually pretty decent for what it was. But, yeah. Also, the book, I should also talk about the 4 annuals. Now, despite the fact that, yes, the JLA series did receive a new printing recently, and it concluded with Volume 9, which I have reviewed on my Comic Corner Classics/Non-Classics. The 4 annuals to this very day have never seen the light of a trade. I have read them. They're actually really good annuals. They're just basically part of those things they had back in the 90s, where they would have these crossovers just involving the annuals, not actually involving issues in the main books and like a miniseries like we do nowadays, where we have like a main event miniseries plus issues that tie into it. Back then, it was just a series of annuals that are part of it. You have stuff like Pulp Heroes, Ghost, JLA Ape. Actually, one was like Ghost Crossings. The Pulp Heroes one I thought was really cool. And one thing neat about these annuals was the fact that each one of these like story names are actually names of default comic books. Like there's one like All-Star Western, Weird Western Tales. Yeah, which I gotta praise DC for that. And for Ghost Crossings, which was the first one they did, which was a really good crossover. This one, basically, during this particular point in time, Martian Manhunter released his first ever annual. And here's something quite interesting about it. It was the first issue of a series released, and it was done by John Ostrander. Though, I think it was, I thought it was, I don't think so. But for some reason, I have no idea why this is. Because apparently it's part of this crossover. Apparently the annuals are exempt from the period of 1997 to 2001. Apparently annuals that come out during this period of time apparently are exempt. Though, I would say actually from 97 to 99, for some reason they won't collect annuals in these particular years, but they will collect in 2000. Because the Batgirl annual that came out in the year 2000, that was actually collected in the very first Batgirl trade. As far as I can tell, I think that's it. Though I think they did also collect the annual from Flash as well, if I'm not mistaken. But As for, well, the annuals that came before this, apparently, I don't know, maybe there was some editorial confusion for not putting these in trades. I have honestly no idea why. I should also point out the JLA Classified series, which was a 54-issue comic book, which I believe one of the storylines did lead into... No, it wasn't this one. They also produced 2 Secret Files and Origins one-shots. One of them actually led to the JLA Elite series, which is actually a 12-issue... I don't know if it was a mini or a limited series or ongoing, but it was canceled due to after 12 issues. It kind of was in a way... it was kind of, well, DC's take on X-Force. That's... If you look at the series, that's essentially what it is. It's DC's take on X-Force. It's a Black Ops version of the Justice League led by Wally West, who's wearing a completely different costume than he does, but in either his own ongoing comic book or in the JLA comic book. And apparently this team involved... Oh yeah, and in the Elite, basically, this is basically a Justice League version of the group Elite formed by Manchester Black from the storyline from the one-shot issue, which was issue 775, What's So Funny About True Justice in the American Way, which that storyline was later adapted to the awesome Superman vs. Elite film, which I have seen. It's a really, really good film. But simply put, they took the group Elite, which at that point, which is led by Manchester Black's sister, and they had Wally West join the team, the Wally West Flash join the team, and just be their own separate thing. Well, Batman kind of knew about it, but the rest of the team, and the team disbanded the 12 issues. So, if you're a fan of DC Comics during this period of time, you would be very happy about, like, it was a good time for a lot of people. I was not reading comics at that point because at the time JLA came out, I was only 9 when it came out, and I was not reading comics at that point. I didn't start reading comics until 2004. So I didn't initially read JLA when it came out. I did read it later on in various sorts of ways, either single issues, some trades. I eventually read almost most of the series online. You know, you read it for free, but it's still a great series to get your hands on. What else? Yeah, and the reason why it ended and was relaunched as Justice League America Volume 2 was because of Infinite Crisis. Yeah, they did the same thing for JSA, which... Yeah, JSA actually started up around... They actually started up 2 years after JLA started. They had this storyline with the JLA crossover with the Justice Society, which at that point was the first team up between the JLA and the Justice Society. First time since the 80s, since before Crisis of Infinite Earths. It's actually a pretty dang good story. There's also this there's also a couple of one-shots I did at that point. There's one called JLA/JSA Virtue and Vice, which I have not read it yet, so I don't have an opinion on it, but I've read all the other stuff related to this. I will eventually talk about the JSA in a later video, and some of you probably might be asking yourselves, if you watch these videos, why am I talking about Justice League now? I do have a good reason for this. Justice League films come out this year, so why not talk about the comics that are probably going to be sort of influencing the JLA film coming out, the Justice League film coming out later this year in November, which is the same month as Thor Ragnarok. Yeah, that's just by sheer coincidence that those two films come out the same month. It's kind of like last year with the release of Captain America Civil War, Batman v Superman, and X Apocalypse both released the same month last year. 3 comic book movies. 3 major ones. Yep. So I guess DC thought, okay, Warner Bros. Like, okay, let's do it again. Let's compete against Thor Ragnarok. Alright. But that's all I can think of when it comes to JLA. That particular comic book. It was a really great series to read. I highly recommend it. There was one writer, I think it was Joe Kelly, he was one of the other writers of the book. He had this really weird idea of having a thing where Batman and Wonder Woman became a couple, which was a really odd idea. And here's the thing. Here's the really weird thing. Outside of the two, two characters outside this book. This relationship was never brought up at all. The relationship was only very brief, and the relationship started, well, kind of inadvertently, by having Batman and Wonder Woman making out, which was later probably inspiration for Bruce Timm and Paul Dini to have that happen in the Star-Crossed three-parter, which I believe happened either, I think, in part 1 or 2, I'm not really sure, where Bruce Wayne and Diana are basically making out in a restaurant. Where Diana's like, I'm sorry about that. And he says, don't be. And he's smiling because he really enjoyed. I mean, what guy would not what guy would not enjoy making out with Wonder Woman? One of the hottest women of the DC universe. Who would not enjoy that? Though in the films currently she's with Gal Gadot, which I have seen her. I did see her performance in Batman v Superman. She did a pretty decent job, and her acting was actually a lot better than her earlier stuff that she did. Yep. So, yep. That's all I gotta say about JLA. Oh wait, there's a couple of things I forgot to talk about. The storyline ended Grant Morrison's run. World War III, which basically involves some cosmic stuff. Oh, and also the Justice League base operations was on the moon. Yeah, they had a watchtower on the moon. No joke. They had it there. That wasn't until Infinite Crisis where it was destroyed by Superboy Prime. Yeah, he destroyed it. Also, the character Aztec, a character created by Grant Morrison from the very short-lived comic Aztec: The Ultimate Man, got killed off at the end of Grant Morrison's run. Yeah, it's very bizarre though how a character like Aztec gets killed off less than about 5 years after his debut appearance. Actually, more like 2 or 3 years, but yeah. So that's all I can think of when it comes to JLA. Yep. So that's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. We'll talk about Justice League America Volume 2. And I'll talk about, good start off, but a very sort of toward the end, it's sort of its downfall. Alright, but until then, I will see you there. Bye.